Welcome to our webinar on Model Mysteries, which is a book that has been written by Anne Levine and Lee Stuntz. I'm very pleased that they came to talk to us today. My name is Kareem Shashakli at IC Systems, and I just want to go over a couple of things before we start. If you're having any trouble using GoToWebinar, I just want to tell you very quickly that on the left side there's a tab that lets you collapse it or bring it out again. And there's also on the bottom there's an area where you can type in questions to us. If you type in questions, we'll answer them either directly by typing back if it's something that you're having a technical issue with, or we will answer during the webinar if we can. If not, we'll get back to you at the end of the webinar, sending an email. If you're having any trouble with your audio, click on the audio setup button and it should fix the problem. Anne Levine and Lee's are here with us today, and Anne works with the Creative Learning Exchange, the Waters Foundation, and the Pima County Superintendent's Office. For more than 20 years, she's collaborated with educators and students across pre-K-12 settings using systems thinking and system dynamics tools. Most recently, she co-authored a set of books, Systems in Motion, and this book, Model Mysteries, which we're looking at, in collaboration with Lee Stuntz. Lee's has worked for more than 25 years encouraging the use of system dynamics and systems thinking in K-12 education. As Executive Director of the Creative Learning Exchange, she's created and edited multiple pieces of curriculum, including 10 books and numerous curricular units. She collaborates with educators, system dynamicists, and citizen advocates toward a collective goal of educating students to be effective system citizens in our complex world. The Creative Learning Exchange was founded by the creator of the field of system dynamics, Jay Forrester, who shared his wisdom by serving on its board until his death last year. Anne will now present her book, their book, to us.
Thank you so much, Kareem. Thank you so much for inviting us, and to everyone at IC Systems for helping us to present this session today. We're really excited to be here. So our basic plan for this session is that we'll share the new resource, Model Mysteries, and then show a little bit about how it dovetails with modeling software. And in particular today, we're focusing on Stella Online. So I'll demonstrate how to use Stella Online to complete some of the challenges in the book, and then we'll hopefully have some time to gather your thoughts and ideas as well. So with that, let's get started. What is Model Mysteries is the first question to consider. And the idea here is we wanted to create a resource that could help people get started with building their own models in a fun, engaging way. So to do this, we use some rather silly context, like zombie chickens populating the world and vampires taking over a city. But even those silly contexts have a lot of parallel situations in the world. So example would be zombie chickens could be compared very easily to the extinction of an endangered species. The idea of mind control technology, somebody that wants to take over the world with this mind control technology, could be compared to setting a goal. So how can you move forward a particular new tech in the world? The idea of vampires can be compared to something like social media, the spread of social media, or the spread of a disease. So, but underneath all those kinds of silly situations, silly contexts, is the idea that we really want to foster this deeper understanding about how systems work and to help the individuals who are reading this book, whether they be students, adults, or just anyone interested at any age, to think about what are the difficult questions that they have and the problems that we face in our world, to think about them in a different way. So using modeling and system dynamics as a way to think about that. So kind of a piece of that why goes back a long ways, back to old friend Barry Richmond. And I still remember sitting in a session he did where he showed a cartoon very similar to this one. And so the idea here is that, years ago, he coined this phrase, system citizen. And so the idea here is that if we better understand the systems that we're part of, then we are also better able to see how our actions impact those systems. So if we can see the bigger picture, we can make decisions that consider that bigger picture, our impact on the system, and that hopefully we make the world a better place. So the idea of being a system citizen is using our understanding of systems to make the world a better place. So who is the audience? We wanted to make this really as broad as we possibly could, and not to think about this as a book of lesson plans or a book of book just for students or book just for teachers. We really wanted it to be a resource that anybody who is interested in modeling could pick this up and use it to get started. So anyone of any age, they could work independently, they could work with a group, you could work in a class setting. And so for that reason, we set this up as a self-paced guidebook rather than as a set of lesson plans. So throughout the remainder of the webinar, just thinking about this who part, you know, I kind of tend to interchange terms like, well, the reader, the student, the user, the person, just kind of think of them all as all part of that audience. So it could really be any one of those individuals. So, and I can never seem to get my head straight about who we're talking about here. So the other piece, this also kind of became a guide for the book. This is a nice little quote. George Richardson actually shared this quote with us that he remembers Jay saying this. And so it became a guide as to how we chose models and how we ordered them. And also a way for us to really stretch our imaginations as we considered what we could include. So rather than just thinking about your basic population model, we said, what about zombie chickens? And IC Systems also kind of took the lead on that because they started to develop some of these interesting models that are also available. Not exactly the same ones, but the idea of zombie takeover to help understand some basic generic structures. So with that in mind, here's the table of contents, which I realize this is very small, but it just gives you an idea of the scope. So the first 6 chapters, each one explores a mystery, and it starts off with a very basic model. And then chapter 7 has a couple models that you can either fix or adjust. So maybe there's some behavior in the model that just doesn't make sense. So we ask the reader to really look at that model and see if they can adjust the structure to get different results. The rest of what's in the book there, so starting from 8 all the way to the end, so we have other supporting material, and that includes options for like what kinds of modeling software could you use, how can you access that, getting some help with the equations if people get stuck on various models, and then ideas for next steps. What could you do after you finish these models? How could you continue to develop your understanding? So the sequence of the chapters as well as the content within each chapter is designed in a way that builds complexity, and understanding is scaffolded. So if you look at that left-hand set of bullets there, you know, the idea is that we start with just how can you just take a basic model and copy that model and then get the results that the model should produce. And then how could you add a little bit to that basic model, modify the model in a totally different context, but using the same structure, maybe adding a little bit of structure, and then finally, slowly, through this gradual release of responsibility, get to the point where you can independently explore some ideas, some of your own ideas, and take some next steps. So that's the idea of each of the, especially the first 6 chapters are that follow that sequence throughout. And so the way that looks in the book is that first we dive into a mystery. So we think about what is this mystery we want to solve. Some of them are very simple, like how do you prevent the zombie chickens from taking over the world, and just some key concepts there, key questions to consider. So then we ask them to go ahead and put together the pieces of this model, assemble the model as it's shown in the book, and then after it's assembled and you've got it to create the right behavior, then go ahead and let's dare to dig deeper. And what we do there is we have 3 dares, so kind of a little bit of tongue-in-cheek there. We have a dare, a double dare, and a triple dog dare for each chapter that's there. And it allows you to just further explore that central mystery a little bit more. And then finally, there's a connect to other stories. And the idea here is that you can take that same model again and then relabel it, put in some different numbers, and then see how it connects to these other contexts, totally different contexts. So let's just do a quick little poll. And Kareem is going to pull up the poll for us. And just to get an idea of who's in the room with us right now. We know the numbers, but not kind of where you're coming from. So it would be nice to see that. Ah. So we'll give you a chance to answer that. So this is interesting. As I'm watching the numbers come in, we're really all over the board, really almost evenly divided, except for the first one, which we have a few folks out there who are not familiar with stocks and flows at all. So we won't be spending a lot of time on introducing people to stocks and flows. We'll give you a very brief introduction, but the book has more information as well. So if you wanted to get started, you could go in there and get the basic concepts. So let's go ahead and turn that poll off. And let me see if I can get this PowerPoint back. There we go. Okay, so let's just do a second poll. So we're gonna introduce the stock and flow piece briefly in a second. But where are you coming from? So sort of what's your frame of reference in terms of what you generally do? And I realize some people might have an other there, so we apologize. We can only fit in 5 options here. So just kind of get a feel for where you are. So I wasn't expecting, so I'm seeing 8% or so from K-12 education, and we weren't expecting a lot of teachers to show for this one just because, of course, this is the middle of the school day. So hopefully if there are interested educators, they'll be able to see the recording later. But it looks like we have, again, a really interesting split here. A lot of folks from higher ed and a lot of folks from business and some from nonprofit and government. So thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your frame. And it's great to have everyone here. So I hope you'll participate along the way. So just very, very briefly just so you get an idea of what we're talking about here with the book, is that we're focused really on what is a stock. So stock is the idea of we're looking at something as an accumulation in a system, something that builds or declines over time, and we could quantify that in some way and be able to count it. It could be concrete or it could be abstract. And so we start off with very concrete pieces in the book so that you could count how many zombie chickens you have, for example. Flows are what affects the stock. So the material flows in or flows out. So it's the amount of stuff that increases or decreases a stock. So it's kind of imagined like a river or a lake. A river flowing in or out from a lake. So the lake would be the stock, and the water flowing in or out would be like the flows. So the other 2 pieces we use are converters and connectors. And the converter is just, it's a part of the system that then affects one of the flows, and then consequently that affects the stock. So they're connected to those by a connector. So converters attach with connectors, and then finally the last piece we need to use is a graph to show what is happening to the system over time. So with that in mind, let's just see if we have any questions out there. So if you could, Kareem, if you have any questions that have come up, can you share those with us?
Yes, Ann, there's one question, and that is if the book is up for sale yet, which I know you'll address later, but maybe you can tease them now.
Sure, we can answer that. We don't have necessarily a complete plan for how the book is going to be distributed. However, at this time, you can get your free digital edition right on the CLE website. And like you said, at the end, we'll address where exactly to find that. So the book is available digitally, and we may decide at some point to make it also in print, but at this point, we haven't moved to that next step. All right, and there are no other questions, Kareem?
No, that's it.
Okay. So let's continue. And we're going to shift into our very first chapter. So hopefully we'll see if we have time for both of these, but what we want to do is show you at least a couple of the models and how they can be built using Stella Online, realizing that these are very simple models. We weren't going to try to spend this time building really complex ones. But so this first chapter focuses on zombie chickens. And so the idea is here, one zombie chicken somehow appears on Earth. No one knows where it came from, but here it is. And then the idea here is that zombie chickens can replicate, kind of like cellular division. So 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, and so on. And so what the book has in it is the idea of here's the model you're going to copy. And we're going to go in a second into Stella Online to create this model. So you're going to copy this model, and it has very basic instructions here. We didn't want to get into giving people, now first put a 1 into the zombie chickens. And we've tested this with middle school and high school students where they can look at this diagram and they know what to do with it. So we start with 1 zombie chicken, and every month 2 replicate and 0 are cured. So we have this idea of we can cure them and make them back into normal chickens. And then along with that, they're going to see a graph in the book. So the idea is they build this model and they should see that behavior. If they don't see that behavior, that means they need to go back to the drawing board and rebuild the model. And then they extend this model. So initially we see this idea that you got linear behavior, but linear behavior is not actually getting at the mystery. The mystery says 1 becomes 2 and 2 becomes 4 and so on. So we need to build in this feedback structure. So really just a basic population model here of zombie chickens, and you could think of them as being born and dying, but we've of course shifted that a little bit in terms of how the zombie chickens reproduce. So then they'll build this model and they'll see this graph in the book and they want to match that behavior. So now they can start to see, we're getting an exponential growth curve. So with that in mind, I'm going to shift over here to Stella Online. And just to give you a quick little introduction to the space here, this is IC Exchange, and you can go and get your own account here. And again, you'll see how to do that at the end of this session. I already have my account, and it's the special Stella Online CLE. So you'll be able to get a special version of this that allows you to build all the models in the book. And so once you have that special version, you'll receive this extended CLE model. That one model will let you build one big model. The one we're going to build right now, we don't need that one for because it's just a little model. So we can just go ahead and add in a new model. So I'm going to do that. And so first we're going to go ahead and title our model, and just since I want to keep track of what's what, I'm just going to call this my zombie chicken model. And notice that the URL automatically appears down here. So this link that appears is how you will be able to access, or others, like if you send them this link, they'll be able to access your model. You can add a description here and keywords if you want, but those are not required. So it would help people find your model if you published it and then people could see it. So the other piece here that's really important is you must agree to share your model under the Creative Commons license. And if you don't know about what Creative Commons is, there's a link here. You can read about what that means exactly, how that model is shared. So we'll go ahead and add this model. And now I have 2 choices. I can upload an existing model that I already built. For example, if I had built a model in Stella as a software file and I had it on my laptop, I could go ahead and upload that model here. But with the book, the idea here is we want you to build the model yourself. So we're going to use an empty model. And now my head said, all right, I should see my empty model now, but it doesn't. It actually just added this model to my list of models, and because it's in alphabetical order, here it is down at the bottom. So zombie chickens is my new model I just created. It tells me the time I created it. I can get info about it, which is kind of nice because it will tell me here's the link, the shareable link you can use, and you can copy that and paste it in wherever you want. We also have the ability to change the settings of the model. So if you decided you didn't like that name and you wanted to change the name, for example, you could do that here. And we can also delete that model, so if you decide you don't want it. But for right now, we don't have anything in there, so we'd like to edit this model. So I'm going to click on Edit, and now I have my blank screen. And like we talked at the beginning, so there are really just 4 basic building blocks here that we're going to use: the stock, the flow, the converter, and the connector. And there are multiple options for these. So for example, in the book, we make it really clear that we would like people to choose the regular stock here, not the non-negative stock. So let's just pretend I accidentally created created a stock that's non-negative. I don't want that, so I can also go over here and uncheck that, and it changes it back into a stock that can go positive or negative. And we want that because we want people to know if the structure of their model is incorrect so that they can go back and fix that. So, and this is a perfect example of this. So we're gonna get a logical behavior on this model when we first create it. So I'm gonna go and basically reproduce the model that we said we wanted them to do, which is to create this zombie chicken model. So I'm going to call those zombie chickens. All right, and so then I need an inflow. And you do have an option of a biflow or uniflow, and the models in the book call for both of them at different times. So we're going to start with just our uniflow and call this our replicating ZCs. And I'll apologize in advance. I'm sure I will misspell something here along the way just because I'm going quickly. So I'm going to hold down my option key and get the outflow. The other option is you can just go up there to the bar and select it again. Either way is fine. I tend to use the option key just because it's faster. So I'm now going to be curing on this side VCs. All right. I can move this around, so I want these on the top so they're not interfering with my arrows on the bottom eventually. But now here I have my basic model that the book asked me to create. You'll also see that it will ask you, it'll tell you like what are the settings over here that you should set this model to. So it'll tell you start and end times and what time units you should use. And the sim speed is totally up to you. It's just a recommendation. You can leave it just as it is. So for this model, we're actually going to leave this exactly like it is. We're going to go from 0 to 12, and we're going to keep it in the time units of months. We're going to leave the integration method as Euler's. Okay, so now we need to put in our equations, but of course the equations here are very simple. We're just putting in constant values. So we're starting off with 1 zombie chicken, so I'm entering that down here in the equation box. And then I'm going to replicate for every month we're going to add in 2 zombie chickens, and every month we're going to cure 0. So that's the very first scenario. And before we can see what's happening if I were to run this right now, but we're going to go ahead and add in a graph pad as well to make it a little bit bigger so all of you can see it a little bit better. So we can open up this new graph pad, add it in. And for Stella Online, for the free version, you can have either a comparative graph or you can have one graph with multiple variables on it. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and add, we have 1 series, we're going to make our zombie chickens what we want to graph, and we're going to go ahead and make that comparative so we can compare one run to another. So at this point, we can run this model, but I'd like you to predict, I know this is a very simple model, but let's just predict if I run this model for 12 months, what will happen to the number of zombie chickens? So Kareem, can you open up that poll for us? Okay, so we have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen, although we have some variation on that. So why don't we go ahead and close that and see what we have? So we aren't all in agreement, so that's interesting, which is fine. So this is one of the things we really, really love to have kids do whenever we have them either build models or when you are running simulations as well, to say, let's set this up and then let's predict what do we think is going to happen. Then talk about why did that happen? Well, first, why do we think it will happen? And then once they actually run, why did that happen? So let's go ahead and close that poll up. Get back here to Stella Online. And so we're going to go ahead and run it. And so you have this play bar down here. There's a stop and there's a restore. So you can go ahead and reset everything. So let's go ahead and play. And so what happens here is that our zombie chickens rise over time in a straight line. And that, in this case, if we want to talk about why, is because we have a constant in and a constant out. And so every month it goes up by 2. So I can hold down here on the graph and actually see that by the end of 12 months, if you look there under run 1, you can see it says 25. So at the end I have 25 chickens, started with 1, every month 2 added in, so we added a total of 24 plus my original 1 gives me 25 over 12 months. So now let's go ahead and add to this structure to get the second part of this model to say, well, that's not really how it works. We didn't want to zombie chickens are not going up in a straight line. Sorry, it's taking me a second to get this selected. Move this up a little bit. So what they are doing is they are replicating faster and faster. So we should be able to add some structure in here. So we're going to build the second part of this model. And let me just switch over real quick so you can see what that looks like. So we're going to build part 2 here. And notice that it's asking us, and this is another piece that can be a little tricky for kids, but so there's a multiplication sign in there. So no explanation of, say, zombie chicken times replication rate. The kids have to go in and they have to figure that out. And we're doing that on purpose. And it really becomes even a little bit more complicated when you see a division sign in there because they have to figure out what's divided by what. So, and by doing that, then they will also be able to check their behavior, and if their behavior is incorrect, they realize, I must have done something wrong, go back to the drawing board, and they can also check their equations in the back of the book if they get stuck. So let's go back here again, and we're going to go ahead and create that model over here. So I have now a replication rate on that side, and on this side, I'm going to make another converter for the cure rate. Okay, again, very simple models. They do build over time. So the replication rate is going to affect how many are replicating, how many replications we get. The cure rate affects how many are cured. And most importantly, how many zombie chickens we have affects how many are cured and how many replicate. So if I only have one zombie chicken in there, then only that one can replicate. It can't. So if I have 100 in there, then 100 can replicate. So it's going to change the behavior over time. So let's go ahead and fix our math now, because now we have 4 warning signs saying, oops, we don't have the correct equations in there. So let's go ahead and add those in. So I'm going to start with the replication rate, which we said was 0.5. So 50% of the zombie chickens will replicate. And over here on this side, we have our cure rate, which we said was 0. And so the very beginning model here says, let's just deal with the inflow and see how would things grow. And then the challenge, the mystery is, how can you stop the zombie chickens from taking over the world? And then you can start to play with the cure rate. And then finally, we have to fix our 2 equations in here. So we had a constant value in here. We see this turned red over here, unused inputs. We need to use up these inputs. So I'm going to erase my number 2, which was the constant value, and then go ahead and add in zombie chickens times the replication rate. Check. And so now my error message went away, and I love the little checkbox, to check, did my equation, is it correct? And so now my warning sign is gone. So we'll do the same thing on the other side. Get rid of our 0, which was our constant value, and change this into the equation, which was a multiplication problem. So that's what the kids know. And they also know that these are your required inputs. So zombie chickens times the cure rate. Check. And we're done. So now we can predict what's going to happen on this model. So I'd like you to go ahead and open up the next poll, Kareem. What is going to happen when we run it now? All right, so we're refining our understanding, actually, just based on having seen the first model and moving to the second. And so this is great. Let's go ahead and close up that poll. And pretty strong majority think it's going to rise as a curved line. So let's go ahead and close that up and see what happens. So we're going to run this now. And yes, indeed. Now, what's important here is that the user here, the reader, needs to check to see, is this, not only is it a curved line like it is in the book, but do I have the correct math in here, and do I end up with the correct number at the end? So the book shows us that we end up with 285 zombie chickens, and yes, indeed, we have 285 zombie chickens. So at this point, once they've done that, then they go into the dares. And some of the dares are, which we're not going to spend time with because I want to actually see if we can build a second model too, but some of the dares are things like, how long would it take for the zombie chickens to have, to reach the same population as the number of people on Earth? So in the book, we say 7.4 billion people. How many months would it take to get there? And so what they have to do at that point is to play with this idea, let me go back to the editor, and we're going to see here our model settings again. So they would have to play here with the stop time and see how long with these exact same settings would it take for the zombie chickens to go over 7.4 billion people. So I'll leave that as a challenge for you. The second thing is then what would happen if we were to actually add in a cure rate? So instead of this being 0, what if it was 25%? We could go out there and we have some magical medicine and we can cure these zombie chickens at 25%. And how would that change the behavior? And so then the triple dog there is how would you actually, you know, if there was a time delay, that's another piece. What if there was a time delay in designing the cure? How would you deal with that? So you get these zombie chickens, they're replicating like crazy, but what if you can't get your cure out the door right away? So you'd have to add a little bit to this model to get to that. And then finally, and I'm just going to play with this really quick, what if we wanted to look at this in a different way? So instead of zombie chickens, what if this was looking at the extinction of the dodo birds? And so instead of replicating zombie chickens, now we have births on this side, and over here we have deaths. So going back to kind of a more traditional population model, you could have a birth rate, and the reader can look this information up, like maybe do a little study of the dodos and figure out, well, what might be a logical birth rate and death rate. They could also do it for other ones, such as looking at, say, an elephant population that isn't extinct yet, but what's happening with that population? What are the birth and death rates? And then to be able to play that out with this new scenario. So there are 3 different stories for each one. So for this one, for example, there's the dodo, one called dodo disappearance, looking at the national debt, and finally looking at saving money for college and thinking about it in terms of earning interest over time. How long would you have to save for college in order to have enough to actually pay for it instead of taking out college loans like my poor daughter had to do. So anyways, little story aside. So then the final story is just make up your own. So how can you, if you're not particularly interested in the national debt and dodo disappearance, what's another thing that you can see in the world that works in the same way, and to be able to do that. So we're going to go ahead and go back to my models, and I'm going to build the second one probably a little more quickly just so you can see it, but the second one is called Energy Drink Mania. So that's chapter 2. So we're going to build the second model just so you can see that process. And so the idea here is looking at, this is a very common issue for young people today to be drinking these energy drinks. And so in the book that talks about like what is the recommended number of milligrams per day, what kinds of levels of caffeine do these different drinks have, and how might you monitor that over time? How does the body process that caffeine? So this is a very simple model as well, but we're going to do the same thing, open and make a new one. We're going to edit this model. So now we're back to our blank screen now with energy drinks. And so this one has 2 stocks, so I kind of want to give you an idea of what happens here. We're going to do our stock, and this is our milligrams of caffeine in the stomach. Okay, and over here, we're going to get a little warning here, so I wanted to show you what's going to happen. So with the free version, you can only have 2 stocks, so this is our limit on this particular model. So this is, we're going to have milligrams of caffeine in the body. And of course, we're going to need some flows here, so we're going to connect this to this, and this is our absorption time. And I should have actually, let me just quickly switch back here so you can see the big picture of what we're doing. So this is the model here that we're going to build, and they have to try to match it to this behavior that you see right here, and then they can start playing with things like, what if the milligrams of caffeine per can was more or less, and what about the absorption time? This is actually based on data, so it takes about an hour for the caffeine to go from your stomach to your body, and about 11 hours for it to be totally eliminated from your body. So we can look at that. And actually what I might do here, because I don't think we're going to have time to build this whole model, so I might actually switch over to but you can see the process is exactly the same. You would put in the the model settings over here to match what you're looking for. In this case, we're going to look over 24 hours, and so not months. We're looking over a 24-hour period. What could you, how many energy drinks could you drink within that period and not go over your limit? And so that starts off with this problem of you have way too much in your system, and how could you change that? But what's really fun with this model, so let me switch over real quick to the finished one so we can see that. Let's see this one. So what's really fun with this model is that we teach students how to build their first graphical function with this, but as a function over time. And that's kind of, this is one of those struggles we have, especially with young people first starting, or really anybody, I mean with the adults we work with as well. It's a real struggle to go from saying we want to pay attention to the dynamics in this system, so what's happening to the caffeine over time, but then you say, oh, but we need a graphical function, but that's one variable compared to another. So they get kind of confused. So we want to scaffold that information in a way, and this was, I'm going to thank George Richardson for this one too. He came up with this idea of, what if you were to create a graphical function of how many cans you were drinking per hour? And so I'm just going to open this up so you can see what this looks like. Over here on the right, we have a graph. So the idea here is that over the 24-hour period of time, so from hour 0 to hour 24, how many cans are we drinking? So you can drink anywhere from 0 cans to 2 cans. And the book has several different suggestions for how to do that. This is scenario number 1. And so the idea here is for the first, I think it's the first 3 hours, we don't drink any energy drinks. And then starting in hour 4, 5, 6, and 7, we drink 1 energy drink per hour. And then we drop back down to we drink 0 energy drinks for the rest of the time. So given that, what would happen to the amount of caffeine over time? And so you can see here, what we get is initially there's very little, well, there's no caffeine. Obviously, we're not drinking anything. And then it jumps up in the stomach first, and then follows in the body, and then it comes back down pretty quickly in the stomach because of that 1 hour of absorption time, and then takes much, 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 much longer to come out of the body, based on it taking 11 hours on average to be eliminated. So that's this very simple model. But then what's really fun here is that the reader can go in and start playing with this graphical function over here. So I could say, well, what if instead of that, I were to say drink 1 can per hour over a longer period of time and then drop off? And that's not the prettiest of graphical functions. I would definitely want to fix that and make that line straight. But what would happen to the caffeine in the body? And they can play with that idea. What if we drank nothing at the beginning? So we're going to kind of keep that down, and then drank 2 cans and then went back down to 0 and did nothing for the rest of the time. How might that look over time? So, and you can run that and see, and you can see we get a big spike, but actually in the end it's a little bit lower at the end than it would have been otherwise, because we just break it up front. And kind of this is something on my mind right now, because I'm going to be headed up to Montana and doing a very long drive, but thinking about how am I going to survive that trip. So hopefully not with too many energy drinks. Let's go ahead and go back to the PowerPoint real quick and just see what questions. These were some of the different patterns, by the way, that kids could explore with this model. And then after that, they would go into the dares again. So the dares were things like how could you get the level back down? What would be a maximum number of energy drinks a person could consume without having that caffeine go over the 400 milligrams at any given moment. So if we go back here to this model, you can see at this peak right here, it's up to 500, almost 500 milligrams right here. So that's over the limit of what you would want in your body. So how can we adjust it in a way that allows us to drink them if we want, but then there's also this whole concept of whether it's healthy to drink them at all. So, and it does just address that a little bit, but this is one of those things of informing young people about what is the impact when you actually ingest something like this. And just another little piece of this is, so we have a linear inflow here, and then we have 2 compounding outflows. So combining the 2 structures that were in the first model. So let's get back here and to see what if any, questions we have out there right now. Kareem?
Hi, Ann. Yes, we have a number of great questions. The first question has to do with how you built the models. Why do you not enter units every time you write an equation? I think adding units every time you write an equation would be very educational for the students.
I'm glad you brought that up because actually it was something I was going to mention and I didn't mention it. It was really a tough call. We do have a section in the book on units in the back. We know, of course, that the units are correct, but we didn't want to bog down that process too much with enter these units, enter these units, enter these units, because it's a great question. I'm not saying we made the right decision, but it was a call we made at the time. We might consider in the future putting out a second edition with that, or having that be in the end with the equation editor. But like I said, there is a section in the back, and I was going to demonstrate at least how you could physically put those in there. So let me just go back really quick here. Right here on the side, well, actually for any individual thing. So this one actually has the units in here because this is a model that I built in Stella and then uploaded. So it actually does have the units embedded, but we didn't necessarily do that as a step-by-step. And it has to do also with that idea of levels of engagement when you're first learning. So we want them to get that idea, but we don't necessarily want to bog down the process of building the model. So I totally understand your point, and I agree with it, but it was a trade-off that we made. Other questions, Kareem?
Yes, there are plenty, and there are more coming in by the second. So
Okay.
do all the models in the book have 2 stocks or less so they can be produced using Stella Online? And of course, related, can you build all the models in the book with the free online Stella?
The answer is yes, but you do need to get that extended version that we were talking about at the beginning. So if you look back here on mine, if I go back to my models here, I have Stella Online CLE, which gives me this one extended model. And what that one extended model does is lets you have what's one extended model, which I believe can have 3 stocks. And it is possible to build all the models in the book if you utilize that one extended model. Now, what you have to do is you can build that big model, but then when you want to build another big model, you'd have to go in and kind of delete what's in there. So if you had something in here, don't delete the model, just delete what's in here. So like if I wanted to start over again, I'd have to clear out my screen and start over with this extended one. Because I think if you delete it, I'm pretty sure, Kareem, you can confirm this for me, that it would disappear and you'd have to request it again somehow. Does that make sense, Kareem?
I would expect that would be the case. I haven't tried it, but that would make sense.
I haven't tried it either. So just be careful. Don't push delete on that model if you get the extended one. That will give you the extended version, like I said, with allows you a little bit more flexibility. Other questions, Kareem?
Can I add something here? The way to get the extended model will be to register on the CLE after you have your IC Exchange online account. The way to get that extended model is to register on the CLE Model Mysteries page with the CLE, and then we will tell IC you have registered and you can get the extended model.
Okay, other questions?
Yes, the next question is, and I think I have to answer this, I'm sorry. Are all models built using Stella Online automatically public on the IC Exchange? So to be clear, there are 3 versions of Stella Online. There is the free version. There's a intermediate version, the CLE version we just talked about. There's an extended version that is fairly low price to purchase access to, and there's the unlimited version, and that comes free with the software, the unlimited version. Models built in the free version, and all these are laid out on the IC Systems website, by the way, under Stella Online, the different versions and what comes with them. The versions that the free version, everything that you build using the free version you have to agree to the Creative Commons license. So yes, they are public in that case. The next question is, will the online software check for unit consistency as the desktop software does? And I'm afraid I should answer that also. The answer is yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, it will. In the zombie chicken model, how do you perform a forecast with the model? You wanted to touch that, but you didn't finish before switching to the energy drink mania model.
Meaning how I'm assuming we mean how long it would take for them to overpopulate the number of people on Earth?
That would be my guess.
Okay, so let me just reset this. Now, see, this is not, we'll talk about this later. I'm going to take off the comparative option. Let's just do that to start. So I'm going to switch over here to the settings for the model. So I want to, and this little pencil thing right here gives you to the settings. And so what we would do is just simply change the end time to stop time. So let's say, well, I want it to get up to 7.4 billion people. So if I go ahead and run it with, instead of going to 12 months, let's go to a 24 months, and we'll go ahead and run that. And then I can check and see how many, and I had to switch back to dodos, by the way, but let's just assume this is the same model as the zombie chicken. So at the end here, I've got 81,000 dodos, or we were talking about zombies, so zombie chickens. But at that point, I would say, okay, well, that's still not quite there yet. I need to adjust it again. And so going back to my stop time, and let's just go out to 50. I'm just going to go out farther than I know I need to go and run it again. And at this point, I'm now up to, by the end of the 50, I've made it to 17 billion. So now I'm way over, so I can kind of step back here on the graph and start looking at where do I hit 7.4, and I get to that. I go over 7.4 here at month 48.25. So, and I could step back a little bit more. 48, I'm at 6.63. So 48.25 is the idea of forecasting how long it would take to get to that level. Okay, next question. Hopefully that was what the question was asking for. I'm not entirely sure.
Yes, it was. Can a student open and edit a model built by another student using Stella Online?
Okay, that's great. That's a great question. So, and I have not played with this quite a lot at this point, but if I were to find a model, let's see, I'm going to go back here to the Exchange, and here's a directory of all the models that are out there. So if I wanted to play with somebody else's model, I could play with it here, and then there's a way, and I've not tested this very much, but how I could get it into, and that's a simulation, so that's a little different. Let me go back. I'm looking for a model. Freen, maybe you can help me with this, because I don't remember how I copy the model.
So at the top under search, there's an option for what you search under in the search. And there's a search box right at the top.
Oh, got it. Okay. Yep. Sorry, Kareem. I've not played with this enough to know how to do this yet. So.
There's a drop down, I think, to pick what types you want.
Oh, got it. Okay. All right. So we're just going to. Okay. So if I wanted to view this one. Okay, here we go. So at the top now, I'm looking at this other person's model. I have no idea what it is, but let's just say I wanted this model on my site. I could then click copy model, right? And I could then give it a new name and copy, agree to the license and copy this model. And now it should be over here in my list somewhere, my new model. And then I can do whatever I want with it up to the limits of the whatever version of Stella Online I have. All right, let's stop for the questions for now, Kareem, if we could, and just kind of go back here because we'll see if we have a few more at the end. I wanted to share just a little bit about this last chapter, Fix It Fun. So this can happen obviously with some of the models where you get erroneous behavior, and this one is really kind of a fun one. So if you know the story, the Hatfields and the McCoys, you know, the idea that they're in a feud, and Hatfields are killing McCoys, and the McCoys are killing the Hatfields. And so we have the reader put this structure in and then run it, and they end up with a negative number of Hatfields. So you can see they've got almost negative 500 Hatfields. And the McCoys somehow are going down, and then they're coming back up again. So that is totally wrong. You cannot have just the flows of being killed. So we have McCoys that are being killed and Hatfields being killed, and somehow we now have a negative number of Hatfields and McCoys that have gone back up again. So, and you can see these are biflows. So structurally, that makes it possible for this to happen. So this particular part of this chapter asks the reader to fix the model based on what they've learned up to this point in the first 6 chapters. And there are some hints, and we also have put all the finished models online with the correct units, to kind of go back to that question, with the correct units, so the reader can go and check if they get stuck on this. But really, what they need here are 2 additional feedback loops to say, how many McCoys are killed needs to be based on how many McCoys there actually are. So they have to go back in and insert these feedback loops. How many Hatfields are killed needs to be based on how many Hatfields there actually are. And that's missing in this model, which is how it's possible for it to go negative. So then the second one is looking at, the second fix-it model is looking at how could you calibrate a model. So if you have some real-world data, how could you calibrate the model in the way that would come close to matching that data? So this is based on another model that was looking at the introduction of electricity in this country and how over time it became very prevalent. And so we shifted it to say, well, let's not look at electricity, let's look at how did access to the internet. So how many households have internet access? And this red line here is based on actual census data, with a few of the points being guessed upon because there wasn't data going all the way back to 1984, specific data points. And then the model, as you create it, produces this blue curve. So they need to go in then and adjust the way, it's not so much adjusting the structure, but adjusting the settings of this model to then get it to match that. And this is what that model looks like. So to say we have some household, it's very similar to an infection model, but it adds in another minor loop here. So you have the households without the internet, they get a certain number of signups, and then you have households with the internet. And then you also have some folks over here that just will never get the internet. They either live in an area where it's not accessible, or they don't want it, they've already made up their minds, they have no interest. So I'm kind of looking at those dynamics over time. So there is, earlier in the book, there's another one where they build the basic infection model, and then this one extends that just a little bit. So that's the Fix It Fun. Finally, kind of what's in the back and beyond, kind of this idea that there's no path that goes all the way. So what are some next steps? Where are some additional resources you can access? Getting at the software options in there that you could use. So Stella Online is one of them, and we chose to use that as we did the graphics in this book. There's an equation helper at the back, and with the explanation of units that I was just talking about, and kind of some problems to work for. How do you figure out what the units are for a given situation? And they actually go back to the book, the original models that they built. So one of the things they can do is they can go back to those models they built and actually assign the units after they've built them. And I totally agree. I'm going to keep going back to this. I totally agree that it's really good practice to put them in as you build. But for somebody who's never ever seen this before, it can be overwhelming. So, and then finally, we have this online finished models. And those are, just see if I can get to the right spot. We have this page here. So this will give you the link for this page, but it has the place here where you can download the Model Mysteries book. It has the preface here, so you can kind of get a look at what this book is all about. An introduction video, and then coming soon, it's not here yet, but how do you sign up for that Stella extended version, the IC Exchange account with the extension with the extra model. And then finally, there's this check your models. So we don't want people to just go in and open the models and say we're done. The idea is, can you build them yourself? Can you create them? But if people get stuck, they're also all right here. So you can go in here and you can check the basic models, and over time we'll be adding more to these. We have some of them in here, some of the extended ones in here, but each one has the basic model in here. So these are the chapters again. with the various models that are available. And for any one of these, you can go in here and you can do it exactly what I just did, where you can copy that model into your own account if you want. So I think that's it on that. Let's go back to questions. So let's just, let's take any final questions here, Kareem.
There was one question. Well, they're still asking about 2 questions about the link to the book, which we just saw on the screen and we'll see again on the next slide. There's a question about having Stella Professional on the desktop and how do you share the model that you've developed with your supervisor. You can, if you have Stella Professional or Stella Architect on your desktop, if you ask us to and you have an account on the IC Exchange, we will enable you to share those models, and they will only be shared with the people you wish to share them with. They won't be publicly available. And I think that's about it.
Okay. So we had some questions for you. So as we're kind of finishing this session up, if you could just take some time to type into the question box, so right where you're asking the questions, type in any answers you have to any of these questions as we finish up this session. So we were really interested in, if you have any ideas on how we can get this into the hands of students or other interested novices, how can we help people find this resource? That's always a struggle. You know, there's always avenues out there for how do you, something like cute cat videos seem to spread really fast on the internet, but a new modeling book, a little bit more of a struggle. So if you have any ideas on that, that would be really helpful. And then if it would make sense to you to have some kind of online learning community for sharing models, I know obviously the Exchange is there, but to kind of find a way for us to find each other, specifically if there are people out there trying to work through the book and would like to have other people to bounce thoughts, ideas, questions off of, and what ways we could share our work in that way. And then let's just see, I think we're going to skip that just right now because we have that question actually in our survey. So when you receive the survey after this webinar, we really please ask you to just fill it out. It's only a 2-minute survey to help us to know how things went for you as you watched this webinar and participated, and what we could do better. And any suggestions are welcome. So Lise, I'm going to turn it over to you.
And I did remember to unmute myself. I just want to thank you for joining us today, and thank IC again for hosting this webinar so that we could introduce our book and, as we did it, show you a bit about Stella Online. We would like, this is the URL to get to the exact page for the Model Mysteries book to download. If you have ideas about whether or not we should put this in print, we would love to hear from you. The other thing is that the CLE website has a wealth of curriculum and information on it to help kids and teachers start down the process of learning system dynamics and systems thinking. And we would encourage you to look on the site at clexchange.org and join our community as we go forward. If you have any questions, email either Anne or me to ask. We are more than happy to answer them. And any comments, any things you would like to say to us, we would love to hear from you. And again, thank you for everybody who made this book possible and this webinar possible.